It began with a single click, an online match that felt like destiny. For 19-year-old Clara Bennett, the possibility of new love was just a plane ride away. She left her warm Australian home for a secluded town in the Pacific Northwest, hopeful that this once-in-a-lifetime romance would finally turn her dreams into reality. In less than a month, those dreams would come crashing down, and a tragic discovery would leave a community in disbelief. Did anyone see the warning signs? How could a few weeks of happiness turn into a nightmare with a single, fatal decision? Could you have spotted the red flags before it was too late? Clara Bennett's story began in a cozy Australian suburb, where the tropical sun and close-knit family life shaped her early years. Mealtime conversations were lively. Her parents worked hard to give her every chance they never had, and her siblings teased her for being both a big dreamer and the family mediator. She developed a keen sense of empathy, always offering help to neighbors in need. Known for her genuine smile and unyielding optimism, Clara believed there was more to the world than the small circle she'd grown up in. During her teens, Clara developed a passion for exploring beyond her hometown. Camping in the outback, sketching places she hoped to see one day, and continually seeking new experiences. She often spoke of wanting to break free, envisioning a life where she could meet people whose worldviews challenged her own. So, when a friend suggested a popular international dating app, Clara's curiosity led her to sign up without hesitation. That's where Jake Morrow entered the picture. From their very first conversation, he struck her as considerate, even asking questions about Australian slang and coastal living. In the weeks that followed, they shared photos and late-night calls. Jake's tales of towering evergreen forests, misty mornings, and a sleepy harbor town captivated Clara. The contrast between her sun-splashed suburb and Jake's quiet wooded community felt exciting. Clara's family, knowing her adventurous spirit, supported her plan to meet Jake despite some concerns. They'd heard faint murmurs, nothing concrete, about Jake's troubled adolescence, but Clara brushed off these hints as mere hearsay. Brimming with optimism, she believed she'd detect any serious red flags on her own. Encouraged by Jake's warm texts, she packed a camera, a journal, and a sense of wonder for what she hoped would be the start of a new chapter. For a short while, everything seemed fine. Clara's calls home brimmed with anecdotes about local spots Jake showed her. She laughed about the constant drizzle, saying she'd never complain about the Australian heat again. But as days stretched into weeks, her messages to friends and family grew less frequent. In truth, Jake's demeanor shifted too. Subtle remarks and uneasy silences cast a shadow Clara couldn't quite name. She tried to ignore the dissonance, reminding herself of her mother's gentle caution and hoping her instincts were overreacting. She couldn't have known that this journey would soon reveal the darker side of Jake's seemingly calm persona, or how truly isolated she would feel, thousands of miles from home, with no one else to rely on. Clara Bennett's first days in the Pacific Northwest unfolded in a blur of contrasts. Her initial excitement mixed with an undercurrent of uncertainty she couldn't quite define. Jake Morrow met her at the tiny airport terminal, greeting her with genuine warmth and a bouquet of wildflowers he claimed were picked from the outskirts of town. In those early moments, Clara convinced herself that every risk she'd taken, traveling far from home, trusting a near stranger, was worth it. For a time, daily life felt almost magical. Jake showed her scenic spots by the harbor, led her along hidden hiking trails, and introduced her to a few neighbors. In her journals, Clara wrote short, wide-eyed reflections on the damp, evergreen world around her, making a point to capture the smell of pine and the hush of misty mornings. During FaceTime calls, she'd tease her siblings back in Australia about the chilly, never-ending rain, swearing she'd never again complain about scorching summer heat. Yet, beneath these light-hearted updates, a subtle strain started to form. Jake would bristle whenever Clara wanted to explore on her own, whether she suggested a quick run to the diner for coffee or a short walk to photograph the local landmarks. "I just want to keep you safe," he'd say, though something in his tone felt more restrictive than protective. Clara dismissed it at first, attributing his behavior to natural concern or cultural differences. But she soon noticed that when she did go out without him, he peppered her with questions upon her return. Who did she talk to? What did they say? Why had she taken so long? The more comfortable she tried to make herself in this new environment, the more Jake seemed to tighten his grip. If Clara texted her mother or exchanged a quick message with friends back home, Jake would hover nearby, reading too much into her every keystroke. She found herself downplaying her feelings, worried that mentioning homesickness or frustration might spark another uncomfortable exchange. In private moments, she tried to reassure herself that Jake's unease might stem from fear of losing her. But as time wore on, she couldn't ignore the fact that his behavior was bordering on paranoia. One afternoon, while exploring the back roads, Clara happened upon a small lakeside spot. She came home excited about the idea of returning there with Jake, imagining a tranquil outing. Instead, he grew agitated that she'd gone anywhere alone without first seeking his permission. That evening, they argued, and the silence that followed felt more suffocating than their raised voices. Clara jotted a cryptic note in her journal about feeling tethered and tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. Locals at the nearby diner began to notice changes in Clara's demeanor. Initially friendly and curious, she now appeared withdrawn, scanning the room as if worried about being spotted. The waitstaff, who occasionally chatted with her, later recalled that she always seemed to be on edge, her eyes flicking toward the door whenever it opened. Over time, she stopped visiting entirely. When asked why by a friendly server who ran into her outside the grocery store, Clara only offered a thin smile and a vague excuse about being busy. Back in Australia, Clara's mother grew increasingly uneasy. She had expected Clara to remain communicative, sharing every new experience. Instead, phone calls were cut short, messages were sporadic, and Clara's once detailed travel stories turned evasive. When gently pressed, Clara would reassure her that all was well, just different, she claimed. But in truth, Clara felt isolated. She had no personal vehicle, no local confidants, and no idea where to find support if things escalated. Her intuition screamed that something was wrong. Jake's temper flared over minor issues, like which TV show they'd watch, or whether Clara planned to return to Australia too soon. He seemed to interpret even the slightest pushback as a threat to his control. Some nights, Clara locked herself in the guest room, listening for any sign that Jake was pacing outside. In small moments of calm, she considered cutting her trip short and heading home, but guilt and fear tangled her thoughts. She worried Jake would see her departure as a betrayal, or worse, become violent. As the date of her flight back to Australia approached, her mother texted often to finalize travel details. Clara responded by saying she might extend her stay, but her reasons changed each time. The nervous tone in her voice, even over the phone, raised red flags. Her family began placing frantic calls to the local police when they realized Clara missed her plane. At first, officials treated it as a routine missing person case, suspecting a simple misunderstanding or a traveler's change of plans. But as they tried to contact Clara directly and found no trace, a sense of urgency took hold. Jake, when reached by the authorities, insisted she'd left on her own for a short trip to a nearby city, an explanation that seemed detached, even casual. Tension built as patrol cars arrived on the narrow street where Jake lived. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. An unsettling quiet overtook the normally peaceful setting. fears that something had happened grew louder with each hour Clara stayed missing. Inside Jake's home, investigators found the answers everyone dreaded. Clara's body was discovered, sending shockwaves through two communities. One on the other side of the globe, left to grieve in stunned disbelief, and the other grappling with the realization that a horrific crime could unfold in their midst. The once hopeful, adventurous Clara was gone, and the tragic end of her journey now posed a grave question. Could anyone have intervened before the darkest possibilities became reality? Local law enforcement treated Clara Bennett's disappearance and subsequent death with immediate urgency. The fact that she was not only missing but also a foreign national heightened the sense that time was of the essence. As officers secured Jake Morrow's home, they meticulously documented every piece of physical evidence that could explain Clara's final hours. A quiet tension settled over the neighborhood. Behind curtains and fences, people waited for answers they both feared and needed. Neighbors who barely knew Clara were asked to recall any small detail. One remembered hearing raised voices through an open window, although they couldn't pinpoint what was said. Another saw Clara on a hurried walk, glancing behind her as if afraid of being followed. These fragments of information, while not definitive, hinted at an escalating situation behind closed doors. Officers also reached out to Jake's friends and acquaintances. A few mentioned Jake had been more withdrawn than usual. Some recalled rumors about him struggling with finances and emotional instability, but no one had concrete proof of violence. Forensics teams dove into Clara's phone and social media accounts. They uncovered heated text exchanges, including a few that appeared to have been deleted shortly before her disappearance. Location data placed her in Jake's home for the final stretch of time she was seen alive, contradicting Jake's version of events. As evidence amassed, the once theoretical possibility of a tragic accident gave way to the grim conclusion that Clara's death was no mere coincidence. Investigators looked for any sign of accomplices or third parties, but the spotlight gradually returned to Jake. The town, already shaken, now rallied around finding justice for a young woman who had arrived with nothing but optimism. For many residents, the sudden presence of investigative vans and distant media inquiries felt surreal. They had never confronted a homicide on this scale. Yet, they recognized that bringing closure to Clara's family, who anxiously awaited answers overseas, would require the community to cooperate fully. With each new discovery, the outline of the tragedy became clearer, pushing law enforcement closer to revealing the full, heartbreaking truth of what transpired. In the days immediately following Clara's death, law enforcement mapped out every plausible theory. Some community members wondered if an unknown outsider had exploited Clara's vulnerability. But with each passing hour, the likelihood of someone else committing the crime dwindled. Evidence pointed more and more towards Jake Morrow. Interviews with Clara's friends revealed a stark change in her demeanor during those last weeks. Digital footprints, like suspiciously deleted messages and a trail of voice notes saved in Clara's phone, showed a toxic cycle of threats and apologies, eroding any doubt about who was responsible. Confronting Jake became inevitable. During interrogation, he shifted his story several times, first claiming Clara left on her own, then suggesting she might have run into trouble elsewhere. Each conflicting statement only heightened detectives' suspicions. Quietly, Jake's demeanor cracked under the pressure of evidence linking him to a series of manipulative texts and unexplained injuries on Clara's body. For a town unaccustomed to violent crime, facing the idea that a neighbor, someone they saw at the diner or gas station, could be capable of murder was deeply unsettling. Still, as new revelations emerged, skepticism about Jake's innocence dissolved. The confrontation set the stage for a case that would later emphasize how easily digital personas can mask hidden intentions, and how vital it is to trust one's instincts before it's too late. Once the full scope of evidence came to light, a harrowing story of control and violence replaced the idealized portrait Jake Morrow had initially presented. Investigators found items in his home that supported claims of escalating aggression, physical indicators that Clara had been living under growing fear. As the prosecution built its case, the town observed the proceedings with heavy hearts. Jake, once seen as a polite neighbor, appeared withdrawn and evasive in court. Through witness statements, digital forensic data, and forensic pathology results, the case against him mounted swiftly. Many wondered if anyone, could have stepped in earlier had they recognized the signs. A sobering statistic surfaced during the trial. According to some advocacy groups, a majority of intimate partner homicides begin with controlling behaviors that escalate over time. Clara's ordeal echoed that chilling trend. Facing overwhelming evidence, Jake pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, thereby avoiding a jury trial. The court handed down a life sentence with parole eligibility after 12 years. Some in the community criticized the possibility of parole as too lenient. Others pointed to the complexities of sentencing and mental health factors. Clara's family, meanwhile, grappled with the enormity of their loss. While the legal outcome offered some resolution, it could never restore what they had truly lost. Determined to honor Clara's memory, her loved ones transformed their grief into advocacy, speaking to young adults about the realities of online romance and warning them to trust their instincts in new relationships. They organized youth groups, collaborated with domestic violence organizations, and shared Clara's story in the hope of saving others from a similar fate. In each talk, they emphasized the hidden risks of uprooting one's life for a connection that might not be what it seems. From an outsider's view, Clara's story underscores the seductive power of digital intimacy, how it can blind us to danger when we're eager for love or excitement. It is also a painful reminder that isolation in a new place can make someone more vulnerable than they realize. Though justice was served on paper, the broader call to trust one's inner voice remains. Whether you're starting a relationship online or in person, her final days prove how crucial it is to stay alert to unsettling behaviors, even if they're cloaked beneath a friendly facade. Clara Bennett's life and untimely death stand as a stark lesson for anyone navigating the unpredictable waters of online relationships, especially when traveling abroad to meet someone face to face. Her hope was genuine, founded on the belief that love could transcend borders. For those of us observing from a distance, her tragedy reveals the complexities behind digital connections. A friendly smile in a video call can hide deeper issues, and the urge to see only the best in someone can obscure unsettling truths. In memory of Clara, her family turned their sorrow into a campaign encouraging others to listen to that quiet inner voice, signaling danger. If anything about a relationship feels wrong, seek help, share concerns, and remember that no one deserves to feel unsafe, near or far from home. Before we end, here's a short excerpt from one of Clara's journal entries she wrote upon arriving in the Pacific Northwest. "The trees here whisper secrets. I wish I could understand them." In hindsight, that line feels haunting. A reminder that sometimes the signs are there, even if we struggle to interpret them. What about you? Have you ever overlooked warning signs in a new connection? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Your experiences could guide someone else on their path. If you found this true crime informative or moving, feel free to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more true crime stories. By staying informed, we can all help create a safer and more empathetic world, online and off.